Hi, and welcome to Professor Pincushion. In this video, I'm going to show you how you can create your own piping. Making your own piping is great because you get to pick whatever fabric you want. So when you're decorating your items, you have endless possibilities. Here's an example of something I made, which is a pillow. And you can see I have my piping on the edge, so it adds that extra little accent piece, whether it be a pillow, blanket, or slipcover. So let's get started. For making your own piping, you're going to need the following items. The first thing you're going to need is some cotton cording like this right here, and I found this in the home decorating department of the fabric store. It comes in different widths, and you could buy it in a package like this, or you can also buy it by the yard. Then you need some fabric, and it depends on the width of the cording you're using and how much piping you're going to need, which determines how much fabric you're going to need. So my piping is about 1/4 inch in width. And if I had a piece that was 18 inches by 22, I could probably get around maybe 3 yards of piping out of that. You're also going to need some straight pins, your scissors, a fabric marker or chalk, your sewing gauge, some thread, and if you're lucky, a rotary cutter, mat, and ruler. The process for starting to make your piping is very similar to doing bias tape. So if you have these items, it makes it go a lot faster, but it's not required. You can always just go ahead and use scissors if that's all you have. The only thing not shown here is our iron and our sewing machine. The first thing we need to do is cut our strips. And we cut our strips on the bias because it'll give the fabric an extra bit of stretchiness for our piping if we go around corners. So to do that, you're going to take your fabric, and I have my salvage here on the end, and this is the end that usually has the name of the fabric printed on the bottom here. And it's a little bit of a tighter weave. The sides here is where they cut it at the fabric store. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take one corner, this top corner here, and I'm going to bring it till I get to this edge over here. Like that. And I just made my fabric a square, so it'd be a little bit easier to demonstrate here. So now, once you have this fold, it's a good idea to press it with your iron so you create yourself a nice crease in order to start with. So we need to determine how wide to make our strips. And for that, you need to look at the width of your cording. So you take the width of your cording and you double the measurement. For example, mine is 1/4. 1/4 plus 1/4 is 1/2 inch. Then I'm going to add 1 more inch for seam allowance because we're doing 1/2 inch seam allowance and I'm doubling that. So 1/2 plus 1/2 is 1. So my 1 inch seam allowance plus the width of my cording doubled, which is 1/2, means that my strips need to be 1.5 inches. So now I'm going to grab my sewing gauge and my fabric marker, and I'm going to make a mark 1.5 inches away from this edge here. So I already have this marked. And you can also use chalk as well. You don't have to use a marker like I'm doing. Just whatever shows up on your fabric the easiest. So after I have a couple of marks done, I'm then going to get my straight ruler, and I'm going to connect those marks. So that would be marking my first strip. So now from this mark here, I'm going to mark 1.5 inches from that. And then use my straight ruler to draw a line. So I would just keep going until I get to the end of my fabric. Now, if at the point you get here and all of a sudden your strips are going to be really small, you can just forget that. You kind of want them to be kind of on the long side, so you don't have to cut as many out. Now, once you have all your markings done, you either use your scissors and you cut along your marking, or I use my straight ruler, my rotary cutter mat, and my rotary cutter, and I just cut my strips like this till I have all my strips. And now since this is a nice crease here, I can just cut along this crease, and then since this is folded in half, I'm going to have 2 strips here. So if I were just to cut this line and this line, and then on my crease, I'm going to have a total of 4 strips. So I'm going to go ahead, cut all my strips, and then I'm going to show you how we're going to stitch them together in order to create one long strip of fabric. To attach your strips together, the first thing you need to do is take your strips, and we're going to match the ends of the strips together, right sides together. So I'm going to take one, and I'm going to line it up with the raw edge here, lines up with the raw edge here. And when you do this, your strip should form something that looks like a triangle, such as this. And you'll notice that the points of your corner are going to be sticking out. That is fine. That's exactly what should happen. You're going to take your straight pin and pin your strips together like that, because then what we're going to do is go to the sewing machine and sew a 1/4 inch seam allowance right here at the end, attaching these two strips together. Now, if you find that what's happening when you put your strips together, again, right side to right side, and they kind of line up perfectly like that, that is not the right way to do it. If that happens, all you need to do is take one of your strips and flip it over. So it was like this. I'm turning it the other way. Now when I line up the edges, it'll work. It'll form that triangle, and that's what we want. So again, now it's lined up. I put the straight pin, I get my next strip, and I do the same thing. Same exact thing. So I'm lining this up. They form a triangle, just like this. And I stick a straight pin. So you're going to pin all your strips together in this fashion, and then we're going to take it to the sewing machine so we can go ahead and stitch that 1/4 inch seam allowance at the bottom. I'm sewing my strips together using a regular width stitch, just a straight stitch, 1/4 inch from the edge, and that'll create one long strip. So that's what we need to get in order to create our piping. Don't forget to back stitch on each edge. And once you're done sewing all your strips together, you're then going to take it to your iron and you're going to press your seams open. All these little corners that kind of stick out, you can go ahead and trim those off so you have a nice clean edge to your strip. So that one's done. And now I'm just going to move on to my next one. So you're going to do the same process for all your edges. Next, we're going to put our cotton cording inside our strip here, and to do that you're going to take your strip wrong side facing up, so the right side is down on the table, and I'm going to put my cording right down the middle, and then take one edge of my fabric and fold it over so it meets the raw edge on the other side. So then the cording is going to be directly in the center. I'm just going to get my straight pins and pin the edges together. So then the cording will stay so we can sew it down. So I'm going to do this along the whole length. And if you find that you don't need to use all of your cording, so you can go ahead and trim this off, the best thing to do is actually take some clear tape, wrap it around, and then cut directly through the middle of the tape. So that'll kind of keep your cording kind of neat and it won't unravel and get all ugly looking. So that's what I recommend for that. So I'm going to go ahead and just finish pinning the whole length of this so my cording is on the inside. We're going to take it to our sewing machine and we're going to stitch right alongside the cording so it stays right at the center of our fabric here. And then this whole raw edge becomes our seam allowance for when we're using it in a project. When stitching your piping, you're going to want to make sure to change to a zipper foot so you can stitch as close to your cording as possible. So this is my raw edge. I have my cording on this side and I have the edge of my foot right alongside that cording there. Your foot may look different than mine. There are some zipper foots that are actually really skinny and mine's really wide, so I can adjust it from on each side. So once you have your position, you can go ahead and start stitching a regular width stitch. Don't forget to back stitch because we don't want our cording popping out. And like I said, you're just going to go right along as close as you can get, keeping the raw edges of your fabric even. And just sew until you get to the end and do a back stitch there as well. Now that our homemade piping is done, we can go a little bit into working with it. Normally you sew your piping in your seam between two layers of fabric. What we're going to do first is baste our piping to the front part of my project. In this case I'm doing a pillow, so this is the front of my pillow. And the reason why I'm doing that is because I want to make sure this piping isn't going to shift as I'm sewing all 3 layers together. So instead of having this layer, my piping, and then a layer on top of that, and just going ahead and stitching it, that might cause it to move a little bit as I'm sewing it, and by basting it beforehand to one layer, I'm making sure that's not going to happen. So I'm laying my piping on the right side of my fabric here, and I'm making sure that the raw edge of my piping lines up with the raw edge of my fabric here. So once it's lined up, I'm just going to pin it as I would any other type of seam that I'm going to be doing. For the corner here, what you can do is just round the piping like this, making sure it's not puckering or wrinkling or anything like that. And when it's flat, just go ahead and pin it. It's a little hard to do corners. It's a straight corner, that's why we're going to round it like that. And then once I come all the way around back to this side, I'm going to make sure that the end that I have on this side is going to overlap about 1 inch. And after I finish pinning this whole thing around, we'll show you how to finish this so it'll look really nice and neat. Here's a closer view of the end where the 2 sides are going to overlap. So this is where I started. I'm overlapping my finishing point. And what I'm going to do is this one that's on top, I'm going to remove all the stitching that was done when I created my piping, so I can basically pull my fabric back and reveal the cording. I'm going to trim my cording this end so it lines up with the beginning of my cording on this side. So just very carefully, we're not cutting our fabric, just our cording. Gonna trim this. I can get my scissors, there we go. And see how they're both like connected now. And what I'm going to do is now on the end of this fabric for my piping, I'm going to fold it over. You could fold it over maybe about 1/4 to 3/8 of an inch. I'm going to pull it and fold it in half again. This time, this extra part is also encompassing the beginning of my cording over here. So just need to fool with it so I can make sure that it's nice and neat looking. And then once it is the way that I want it to be, I can go ahead and pin it, and that way when I baste it, it's going to be a nice, not necessarily a seamless look, but it's going to be a folded edge, so we're not going to have any raw edges showing or any of our cording showing. So it's definitely going to look a lot neater. So I'm going to go ahead, pin this, and then I'm going to go to the machine, we're going to baste it, and then we're going to finish up using our piping. I finished basting my piping to my fabric. So now you can see 2 sets of stitches. The first one was when we created our piping, and here's my basting stitch right here. I just did it along the edge because I want it to be hidden for when I do my regular seam allowance. I won't have to take the stitching out. It can just stay in there. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to take my fabric and I'm going to lay it over so the raw edges match up just as I would continue with my project. The thing is, the difference is you're going to want to keep your zipper foot because you want to stitch as close to this cording as you can get. So your stitches are probably going to end up right on top of this first stitch we created when we made the piping. So if it lands there, then it's awesome. So I'm just going to go ahead, finish pinning this, stitch it up, and then we should be done working with piping. Here I have my completed sample project, my pillow, and you can see my piping has now been attached. It looks great. So making your own piping is definitely beneficial because you can pick whatever color fabric you want, any type of print. Definitely you can mix and match with patterns and designs. So it's a little bit more liberating than using the prepackaged stuff you get in the store, as those are pretty limiting in your color scheme. Once you make it though, you definitely have unlimited possibilities. You can add it to pillows, slip covers, blankets, whatever you can think of. So it's great to make it yourself.